Other than the 4 Champions League places given to the English teams, the UEFA Cup offered up 3 more chances for English clubs to play in Europe, those being the 5th place team, the League Cup winners, and the FA Cup winners. But since the last 12 FA Cup winners were all won by teams who qualified for the Champions League, that UEFA Cup spot gets given to the 6th place team. We already know Portsmouth threw that opportunity away, so they're just gonna have to go and win it. Easier said than done. Or is it? The 07-08 FA Cup season is possibly the weirdest this side of the millennium, and what materializes in the 4 months between the 3rd round and the final may never happen again. Portsmouth's main barriers are the Big 4 and the 15 other Premier League clubs. Having dealt with Championship side Ipswich in the 3rd round, remarkably 7 of the other 15 were gone in round 3. 5 of them went down to lower league opposition, and that included Everton, Blackburn and Villa, the 3 teams above them in the league. Plymouth? Gone, and 4 more Premier League teams were out of the way. There were now more teams from outside the Premier League left in the 5th round than there were in. Preston defeated, Liverpool dumped out by Barnsley, Arsenal gone. Portsmouth now faced their first Premier League opposition this late into the season, and of course, it had to be Manchester United. Remember how Portsmouth were a thorn in the United side in the league over the past few seasons? Well, those were at Fratton Park. This is at Old Trafford, and Portsmouth have done a fantastic job at holding Premier League champions-elect goalless for over 70 minutes, until Milan Barros was played through one-on-one with the United keeper, where he jinked his way past Kuszek before being fouled inside the penalty area, giving the referee no choice but to send him off. Now the usual thing to do would be to send in your backup keeper, but Kuszek was the backup keeper. He came on at halftime when Van der Sar got injured. Now he's off, and in between the 6 is Rio Ferdinand, who was helpless in trying to save Montari's penalty. Sometimes you need a bit of luck on your side, or maybe 2 slices of luck, because after defeating Manchester United, there were no more Premier League teams left in the FA Cup at the semi-final stage. This sort of thing will almost certainly never happen again. West Brom, Barnsley, Cardiff City. 3 Championship sides stand in the way of Portsmouth and glory. Naturally, they showed their strength unlike the other Premier League teams and beat West Brom in the semi-finals 1-0, then beat Cardiff City in the final 1-0. Their first major trophy in 58 years culminated in their debut season in Europe. Fratton Park hosted its first ever European game on the 18th of September 2008, which saw Portsmouth run out 2-0 winners over Vitória Guimarães, with Lassana Diarra and Jermaine Defoe on the scoresheet. After defeating the Portuguese side after extra time in the second leg of the first round, Portsmouth were thrown into a group consisting of Heerenveen, Braga, Wolfsburg and Milan. Due to the round-robin nature of the group stage that year, Portsmouth fans unfortunately missed out on a trip to the San Siro. But we as a society were lucky enough to be graced by one of the most out-of-place sightings in football. Kaká, Inzaghi, Pirlo, Seedorf and Ronaldinho at Fratton Park. Pompey had the European champions of only 2 years ago on the ropes, leading Milan 2-0 with 10 minutes to go, before very late Ronaldinho and Inzaghi goals rescued a point for the Italian giants. Alas, defeats against Braga and Wolfsburg either side of this famous match meant that the final matchday win over Heerenveen would be the last European game Portsmouth would play to this date. What a ride. Within their first season in Europe, the domestic form took a downturn, falling out of both cups in the early rounds, falling from 8th to 14th in the league and recording their heaviest defeat in their Premier League era. If what was happening on the pitch became a cause for concern, what was happening off the pitch was frightening. When Leeds made the Champions League semi-final in 2001 and was subsequently relegated 3 years later, their chairman stated that they'd lived the dream, after racking up hundreds of millions of pounds of debts. Well, just 7 years later, Portsmouth had done practically the same thing. Back in January of 2006, Milan Mandaric sold the club to French businessman Alexandre Gaydamak, who oversaw the club's peak successful years in modern history. However, rumours were flying around at the start of the 08-09 season that Portsmouth had overspent and racked up mountains of debt, with owner Alexandre Gaydamak looking to sell the club after withdrawing funding. Pedro Mendes and Solly Montari left for significant fees. Redknapp, who knew the money had run out, left for his second time in October to join Spurs. He brought Jermaine Defoe with him for €16 million in the winter transfer window, a window which also saw Diarra leave for $20 million. Despite gaining over £50 million worth of transfer sales, Pompey still owed an eye-watering amount to the banks, HMRC, agents, clubs, and even scouts. And in the 09-10 season, it became the players. At the end of the 08-09 season, Gaydamak agreed to sell the club to Suleiman Al Fahim, but the takeover process lasted the entire summer, which meant that no money was invested into the squad. Cranshaw, Johnson, Distan, Crouch and Pamerol all left the club that summer. Portsmouth was eventually sold to Al Fahim for a quid. Gaydamak became a creditor himself. Al Fahim had all the promises of a deep-pocketed, ultra-wealthy man, but didn't bring the necessary funds in time. Players weren't paid up until September, and HMRC were knocking at the door with a winding-up order. Al Fahim was eventually found out to be having nowhere near the amount of money to finance the club himself. But in fact, he had been taking loans from banks to do so. Al Fahim sold the club to a man who went by the name of Ali Al-Faraj, who people at the club had claimed to have never laid eyes on. The whole discussion of who actually owned Portsmouth and who owed what and when is way too long to get into. So to put a long story short, Al-Faraj, who may not have existed but also could be a front for a group of investors, had his 90% stake in Pompey frozen and given to a man called Bahram Chanrai, who was a creditor that became upset at not being paid his money back, who said, "Screw it, I'm taking over." Chanray had no care for the club or the sport, put Pompey into administration. Pompey were deducted 9 points, got relegated, reached the FA Cup final again, somehow, came out of administration. Then in October, Chanray sold Pompey to a man called Antonov. Antonov, who has an arrest warrant for asset stripping a Lithuanian bank, a European-wide warrant. Antonov resigned. The club goes into administration again. 10 more points deducted. Relegation again. 17 players leave in the summer, and the Portsmouth supporters buy out the club from administration. And breathe. In just 4 years, Portsmouth climbed from Division 1 to FA Cup winners and playing against Ronaldinho. In just 4 years, they went from playing against Ronaldinho to playing in League 2. It may not be glamorous, but at least they still have their club. Their fan-owned club. Boy, that was a ride. One hell of a ride.